Okay, so in the last video, I biked around DC and visited a bunch of different markets to pick up ingredients to make something. So today, let's make that something, which is going to be a gumbo. All right, now it's time to turn back into a pair of disembodied hands. So here's our bountiful haul. I mean, in general, it's pretty nice. So gumbo is one of those recipes where I won't lie and say it's easy. It is flippin' delicious, it's hearty, and this recipe will make a boatload of the stuff. However, it does take a while and it can be quite difficult. Now, why I decided to make this directly after my bike trip across the city, I'll never know. But I will say, however, with the knowledge from future Logan, that this turned out to be a super delicious dish. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is our veggie prep. And we're going to start by dicing up our sweet peppers. Now we want to cut these into bite-sized pieces here and try to scrape the seeds out if you can, but there's no reason to get fussy about it. I'm going to chop up about 3 of the sweet peppers I got and collect these into a bowl, and we're going to just move on to the next prep item, which are 3 yellow onions. Now I didn't actually get these on the trip, it was just extra. Just go ahead and dice the yellow onions up, and we really don't need to be too exact here, just enough so that they're roughly the same size as our chopped up sweet peppers. Now collect these into a bowl and move on to the next item, which is our hot peppers. Again, chop these into a similar dice, and if you want a little heat, you can leave some of the seeds in. I did grab a few tastes of the hot peppers, and they weren't too spicy, but they did have a nice flavor. Scoop them into a separate bowl from the onions or sweet peppers, and we can move on to the next thing, which is chopping up a few stalks of our celery. Now try to chop these pieces into similar size as the onions and peppers. Once we do have these diced up, we can place them into the same bowl along with the sweet peppers. Okay, next we need to chop up some okra, and I ended up using all of these because I'm a huge fan of okra, but if you want to, you could skip putting okra into your gumbo and it's totally fine. However, it will kind of thicken up the gumbo nicely though, so that's just something to keep in mind. Place this into a separate bowl from everything else. It's just gonna kind of go in at a different point. Now lastly, from our veggie prep, we're gonna need to chop up a few cloves of garlic. I like to pre-smash these so they don't roll around and then just begin chopping them into somewhat of a mince. Now once I got a nice mince like this, we can just go ahead and put this into a separate bowl from everything else. All right, now that we have the veggie prep done, we can move on to the meat prep. Now let's start with the hardest thing, which is the shrimp. Now the shrimp that I got has the shells on and it isn't deveined, so we're gonna have to remove that. So go ahead and start by pulling the shells off. I find that if you twist the shells, it will kind of slide off relatively easily. And it looks complicated and annoying, but it only really takes about a minute or so. And the benefit here is that not only is it cheaper, but these shells really have a lot of flavor jam-packed into them. Now we're gonna collect these shells off to the side and we're gonna use them in a minute. Now once we've deshelled our shrimp, it's time to devein it. And to do that, just very carefully slide a knife along the spine of the shrimp. And once you do, you should be able to pull out a stringy thingy that looks like this. Now this is actually the shrimp's intestinal tract, and I don't think it will kill you if you eat one, but it definitely can literally be filled with crud. And plus they don't really have a nice texture when you bite into them after they've been cooked. So it does take a minute, but it does really improve the overall experience. Now if you want a little bit less pain, you could pay a little bit more and get them pre-peeled and deveined. And no one's gonna judge you, least of all, I won't. Now, if you're asking yourself, when is he actually gonna get to the actual cooking part? Well, for a recipe like this, prep is everything. Later, things will move very quickly, so it's a really good idea to have the meat and veggie pre-prepped, and this will save you a huge amount of stress and make it far less likely that you end up burning anything. I don't always think it's crucial to do this like mise en place style thing, but for a recipe like this or for pad thai, it's pretty important. All right, now that our shrimp is prepped, let's collect it into a bowl and put the peeled shrimps into the fridge because we're not gonna need them for a little bit. All right, now let's move on to the next ingredient of our meat prep, which is our andouille sausages. Now these sausages are kind of a nice smoked pork sausage, which will add a really nice flavor to our gumbo. Just cut these sausages up into little coins like this, and we can move on to our last meat ingredient to prep, which is our smoked pork jowl. Now honestly, I've never eaten this before cooking this gumbo, and it's got a kind of weird texture, but it kind of has a similar taste to bacon, but it's far more chewy. Now the smokiness that permeates throughout this will transfer into the gumbo. However, if you want to skip this ingredient entirely, you'll still get a super tasty gumbo without it. And if you do opt for using the pork jowl, just chop it into little cubes and add it into the same bowl as the sausage. Now the last part of our prep is to make some spice blend for our gumbo. Now this is just gonna be my version. If you want to use your own, or if you have a different spice preferences, it's totally up to you, and I'm sure it's gonna taste super great. So for mine, I'm just gonna start with some black pepper. I'm gonna add some white pepper, then some cayenne pepper, and then add some onion powder, and then some thyme, and then some smoked paprika, and then some oregano, and then a big whopping punch of garlic powder. Now lastly, I have a completely optional ingredient, but I bought some a few months ago and I've been really excited to use it, which is what's known as filet powder. Now this is a traditional gumbo ingredient, which is made from the leaves of the sassafras tree. However, it's kind of hard to find, so it's completely optional and you'll still get a really delicious gumbo without it. All right, go ahead and mix the spices up and we're ready to go. Now the first thing we want to do is make our cooking stock. So go ahead and place a medium pot over medium heat and toss in some neutral oil and just kind of let this heat up. Now once it does start to get sort of hot, go ahead and dump in the shrimp shells. Just start cooking them until they get nice and pink. Now once all of them are nice and cooked, go ahead and pour in 6 cups or about 1.5 liters of chicken stock. And this is going to help capture all that delicious flavor on the shrimp shells. Now just let this all come up to a boil and let it cook for about 2 minutes. And this is just long enough for those last vestiges of shrimp flavor to kind of infuse into the chicken stock. Now once our 2 minutes are up, go ahead and strain the shells out and collect this delicious stock. And you can even see kind of the oil and everything that just, this is far more than just chicken stock now. Now, if you don't want to bother though with all this shrimpy shell business, you can just use chicken stock by itself and it will still be mega delicious. Now go ahead and set the stock off to the side now, and it's time to actually begin cooking our gumbo in earnest. So we need to start with a big pot. And I'm just going to be using my enamel Dutch oven, but anything else will also work here. Now just place this over medium heat and let it warm up. Once I did start to think it was warmed up, I added in a test piece of the pork jowl, and the pork jowl was pretty fatty, so the fat's gonna kind of come out as we cook. However, if you're gonna skip this step and not use pork jowl, you might wanna just add in some neutral oil in here at this point. So I can see that the pork jowl was cooking well, so I just dumped in the pork sausage and jowl and everything all in at once. And we're just gonna cook this for a few minutes and let everything brown up and cook in the pot. We really wanna keep cooking the sausage until it becomes nice and crispy, and also allow time for that pork jowl to begin to render out all of its fat. Once we reach this stage, we want to just go ahead and start collecting up all our cooked meat and place it in a bowl for later. It doesn't need to be cooked all the way through, but we just do really want to have some nice crispy edges. Now just be sure though, we really want to leave that fat in the pot though. And at this point, we want to have a total of about 1 cup of fat or oil in that pot. Now I reckon from what I can see, I have about 1/3 of a cup of fat that came out of the pork jowl. So I added in about 2/3 of a cup of neutral oil into the pot. Now we're gonna let this oil heat up and collect any errant pieces of meat that we may have missed. Now as the oil heats up, take a minute to collect yourself, because this next step is long, intense, and will make you wonder why you decided to make this to begin with. However, if you can push through the next 20 to 30 minutes, you'll have some of the most delicious stuff you've ever had in your life. All right, once the oil is hot, we're gonna take the plunge and just toss in 1 cup of all-purpose and begin mixing vigorously. Now keep mixing this and trying to break up any clumps that formed, and keep mixing this until it starts to kind of have the texture of gravy. And we're just gonna keep stirring and keep the heat on this. Now let's actually talk about heat. First off, this stuff is gonna be super, super hot, and it will burn the heck out of you and leave you with really nasty things. So just be careful and try to keep your hands clear if possible. As far as heat, there's 2 ways we can do this. We can do fast and risky, or slow and safe. Now I was kind of limited based on the burner that I have for filming, so I picked somewhere in between, and my roux took about 20 minutes total. You can do this faster, and you can also do this slower. I've done this where it takes 45 minutes of stirring. What we want to do is we want to keep cooking this flour and oil mixture until it turns very dark brown. However, we don't want it to burn. Now if you stop stirring this mixture, it will burn super quickly and you'll have to start it all over. And if that does happen, then I'll be sure to pour one out for the lost roux. Now just keep stirring and stirring and stirring, and just keep letting this cook. It's gonna get gradually darker and darker and darker, and the ideal color is something like a bar of milk chocolate. While halfway through cooking this, my smoke detector went off and I had to quickly deal with that. But once that was taken care of, I kept cooking it until it reached about this color. Now you can even cook to a darker color, and I've actually had that and it's very delicious, but I was kind of starting to run out of time and energy, so I just stopped at this point and it was still pretty good. Now if you made it to this point, quickly pat yourself on the back between stirring, and I wanna take a small break and just discuss what I used to pick up all of these ingredients, which was my KBO e-bike. KBO sent me an e-bike to be able to help get around DC and didn't see how it worked. It's got a really nice range, which gives you about 55 miles, or about 88 kilometers on a single charge, which I've been really utilizing recently. Additionally, it's got a nice 500-watt motor, which was really helpful, especially for going up hills in DC, which there are a few. And also it's got nice disc brakes, which really help stop when you're going down those hills. If you are considering getting an e-bike, I totally recommend this one, especially for the price. If you are interested in an e-bike, check out the link in the description down below. And thank you again, KBO, for sending me this e-bike, which made this video possible. And now it's time to start adding in our veggies. Keep stirring and add in our diced onions, and just keep stirring them until they start to soften. It shouldn't take too long. And once they do, we can add in our sweet peppers and celery and let this cook for about 30 seconds or so. Now this will all cook and soften relatively quickly because this stuff is still pretty hot. Once it does soften a little bit, we can go ahead and add our sweet peppers and let them cook for a little bit. And then we can add in some garlic, and we really only want to cook this for about a second or two. and then add in our spice mixture, and we'll also just want to cook this a little bit just to kind of warm up the flavor. Then we can add in our meat, which we cooked earlier, and then lastly we can add in our cooking liquid. Now give this a stir, and it really won't come together nicely until it really starts to boil. But just keep stirring this. This might not be a bad time to give it a taste to see if it needs any salt. Depending on what you have in here, it may or may not need salt, and actually, believe it or not, mine didn't really need much. Now at this point, we can go ahead and add in our okra, and I'm also gonna add in a few bay leaves. And once this does boil, crank the heat down, and we're just gonna let this simmer. And we can simmer this for as long as we want to, kind of a minimum of about 20 minutes, but you can go for hours with this if you really want to. Now, as I mentioned, I was kind of running out of time, so I really only let mine simmer for about 40 minutes, at which point I was gonna call it. So right before we're done, go ahead and toss in our shrimp, which have been in the fridge, and these will cook super quickly in this hot gumbo. And just, make sure they have some time to cook thoroughly, completely through. But then that's basically it. We've made our gumbo. I think this looks completely amazing, and I was very, very happy with what this turned out to be. And trust me, it also tastes really good as well. Now, we need to just go ahead and plate this up. So you can use a bowl like this to pack in some buttered rice, and then just put this over a plate, and then we can just ladle over our delicious goodness over the top. God, this was so freaking tasty. I could eat the whole pot of this stuff. And also, if you like beer, after cooking this monster of a recipe, it will be so much better and taste so much better, and it just goes really well with this dish. All right, well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please consider sending this to a friend or subscribing. I really appreciate you guys watching this whole video. I know it's a long one, and if you did enjoy this type of format, let me know. All right, I will see you guys again soon. All right, bye.